Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in just a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every week to explore a few of the places where we currently see grace, and its absence, playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We're glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. God.
October. Somehow it's October. Here we are on the Mockingcast, ready to talk about it. What has October brought so far for the two of you?
Did you guys know that Hobby Lobby is no longer selling Halloween stuff?
What? Are you serious?
Totally serious.
Satanic Panic?
I don't know. My friend went in to buy some. This is the great irony, to buy some little Halloween bags to do treats for underprivileged kids in Houston. And they were like, "We don't sell Halloween bags anymore." And I was like, "Did you ask them other questions about their lives?" She's like, "No." So that's my news that's fit to print. Do not go to Hobby Lobby if you need Halloween decorations. They no longer sell those.
There's not a Hobby Lobby
from Sarah.
within miles.
Head straight over to Joann's.
I'm just here for the mom energy. Yeah, I can tell all the mom tips. You can't get your Halloween decor there anymore. Target is still your chapel.
I saw some meme of an abandoned storefront that's it says August 30th, 2020. It's completely abandoned. There's tumbleweeds going, and then September 1st, it's Halloween Superstore. There's Halloween everywhere. Just somehow magically on that moment on September 1st, these Halloween Superstores pop up in abandoned spots.
I mean, people are hungry for the next thing to celebrate for sure. I'm seeing so much more blow up Halloween, the inflatables. People don't typically do a lot of those where we live, and because they're tacky, but I mean, we've always had one, but I'm seeing a lot more of them because I feel everybody's just looking for some fun.
I'm in favor.
Yeah.
What about you?
Something
Arch?
you can do on your own property without, having to go anywhere. Something
or
inflatables
make
are
a
safe.
grand
Inflatables are
political
safe.
statement and piss people off. You know what I mean?
Yeah, perfect.
Everyone can agree on a
How many
giant
more days till the election?
black cat with a jack-o'-lantern.
Mm-hmm.
It's the last
Except for
thing
Hobby
left
Lobby.
we can agree on. Except for Hobby Lobby,
Except for
but
Hobby Lobby. They're out.
everyone else. Yeah.
Just rebrand it as a harvest thing with lots of pumpkins.
Right, come on. We've been doing this forever as
Still
Christians.
take it to the bank.
Take it, move it around, shake it up, give it back.
Gosh. Well, what about you, Rucker?
I sort of can't believe it's October. It's very strange. It's somehow it's the year which never ends, and yet I don't know. Time is such a weird thing right now. And I don't know what to say. I'm still waiting for fall to kind of arrive in South Florida. Apparently the dry season arrives October 15th. I'm looking forward to that, to be it not being super hot and humid outside. But generally speaking, we're good. My wife's birthday was yesterday, and that was a fun little celebration, and we're doing okay. My oldest son is coming home from college this weekend for the first time since we dropped him off a couple months ago. Just wanted to come home for the long weekend to say hey. So looking forward to seeing him. I know Marshall is going to freak out, our 4-year-old, because Jackson is as a god in his eyes. So should be a fun little weekend.
You have to video that, RJ.
We will. We totally will.
I'm desperate to see that. That's so sweet.
We'll probably take him to the airport or something. He won't know where we're going, and then he'll just lose his mind. Yeah.
So it's time is a flat circle in Florida land these days.
Yes. Although we're going to reopen pretty soon here. We're going to regather for worship. We've been worshiping outside for a month or so, which has been good. But now I think we're actually going to be back in the church in a few weeks, which is going to be good, but also strange. No singing, social distancing, everyone masked up. I'm debating whether to wear a transparent mask, which looks really creepy, or to wear a regular mask, which also looks creepy.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But people are sort of used to it. When we were told we couldn't, open for worship without a 50 different precautions, at times no, that sounds terrible. And now it's well, you do that to go into Best Buy. So
that's right. That's right.
That's true.
It's I guess it's less weird, though it's still. I mean, there are rumblings here of that. I mean, in my world, the big thing that's happened is Eddie Van Halen. Eddie Van Halen died.
I did.
yesterday. I mean, it's the most recent episode of The Well of Sound, or at least the last one of our previous season, was all about Van Halen. So I spent about 2 months completely immersed in this man's life work, and he's a conundrum. He's a very fascinating figure, and it's just sad. It's sad to me.
I'm sorry, Dave.
He, So if you're out there, put on Eruption and just go wild, and think of me with a
I
tear in
definitely
your eye.
watched his 13-minute European guitar solo on YouTube last night, which was just like crazy. It's just so crazy.
well,
He's a modern day Bach, basically.
Well,
on
what people
electric
don't
guitar.
realize about him is that not only did he sort of pioneer these playing techniques, but he actually was sort of a technical, innovator. He kind of rebuilt the electric guitar, actually the electronics of it, and all of the amplifier technology. He just sort of had a preternatural understanding of this stuff in a very weird way that completely shaped everything that we hear on the radio, but no one really knows that in the way that. Anyway, lecture over. That's my almost famous moment of the
Really,
year.
thank you, Dad.
I was here
Thanks,
for it,
Dad. That
Dave.
was good.
I loved it. It was good.
Well, remember there was Billie Eilish was interviewed somewhat recently, and it turned out she had never heard of Van Halen, and all the dads worldwide, at least the white dads, were like, "What? This is a travesty." And I was thinking, how Van Halen is not aged particularly well. People don't really think about them. David Lee Roth is this sort of gaping hole in the '80s. World. We kind of evolved, made a decision to forget about that guy. So anyway, we're going to go from that, which is kind of only semi-serious, into something else that feels a little like a lot of intellectual energy expended on something that doesn't always feel like it's worth it. And yet, this article by Sam Anderson that appeared in the New York Times Magazine. Sam Anderson is rapidly becoming one of my favorite writers out there. He's the one who wrote the profile of Weird Al Yankovic.
Oh, nice.
That we talked about. And he wrote a book called Boomtown. And basically look for his byline. He's fascinating. But he wrote an article, a long one, called What I Learned Inside the NBA Bubble. And of course, I thought of RJ when we read this, but it
Heat loss
gets there.
last night. Depressing. But continue.
It gets there. So he writes this. He says, "In my life, basketball has always been a deep emotional refuge. When I feel sad or agitated or morally conflicted, I can go shoot 100 free throws to calm myself down. The game is one of the purest forms of meditation I know. And basketball is not simply a game. It is a nearly mystical blend of individual and collective excellence, one of America's great cultural innovations." Speaking of being in Disney World where, the play is going on, he said the level of play was amazingly high. This was one of the bubble's great unexpected gifts. Somehow all this isolation and weirdness combined to produce a highly concentrated form of basketball. A pure shot of beauty and exuberance in a nation starved for exactly those things. But this is sort of the ending part where it gets really into our sort of territory. He said, before particularly intense games in the bubble, so he was sent down there by the Times, figuring that this bubble that they've created for NBA players would completely collapse and it wouldn't work at all, and they wanted to have someone on the ground to cover that. But it has worked, and sort of against all odds. So he says, before particularly intense games in the bubble, I would text my wife about my deepest fears. What if Damian Lillard couldn't maintain his superhuman scoring? What if I woke up tomorrow with no more Blazers games to look forward to? He's from Oregon. After one flurry of this, there was a long pause. I could see that she was typing something. Do you feel weird caring so much when there are so many more important things to care about, she wrote. She said, even in my panic sweat, I recognize this is an excellent question. It was, in a way, the crucial question of the bubble, and maybe even of America writ large. Does basketball matter? Does entertainment matter? In a world where governments are rotting from the inside out, where people are gasping for breath, why would we spend any resources on games, distractions, theater? What did it mean that our country's most visible model of health and normalcy and logistical competence were coming from a professional sports league? Well, yes, I responded. I did feel weird. Part of me sees basketball as embarrassingly adolescent, a costly distraction, exhibit A for the way societies prioritize exactly the wrong things. The hours of attention I pour every month into sports could be poured into activism, outreach, gardening, exercise, calling my congresspeople. Another part of me, though, is not embarrassed at all. Sports, at its best, answers a deep human need. We are ravenous for meaning. We want to know that what we do matters, because Lord knows there is plenty of evidence to the contrary. Play is a bubble inside of which meaning is undisputed. It doesn't matter that the bubble's borders are arbitrary, that our games depend on Byzantine rules and colorful uniforms and timers and buzzers and whistles. If anything, this makes the illusion more powerful. We have created purpose out of nothing, like gods. Inside the lines, our actions make perfect sense. Some are good and some are bad, and in the end there is a result. Statistics are metaphysical bedrock. It all just depends on our collective will to believe. The Dutch historian Johan Hunsige, in his classic 1938 book, Homo Ludens, which means playing man, argues that civilization itself springs from the urge to play games, that play is the master impulse behind humankind's most sacred behaviors. This is Hunsige. The turf, the tennis court, the chessboard, and the pavement hopscotch cannot formally be distinguished from the temple or the magic circle. The concept of play merges quite naturally with that of holiness.
If it ain't Dutch, it ain't much, right, RJ?
I'm glad you said it. I was holding myself back.
I will jump in. I absolutely love this. It first of all, basketball is one of the few sports I can watch and understand. So I do like basketball a lot. Actually, I will watch it with Josh. I think it butts up against, it's interesting, it intersects with a lot of the both secular actually and sort of church arguments that I hear a lot right now. I was on, I have this great group of women from church that I get to do these phone calls with weekly, like a small group. And, one of the women was saying sort of she hasn't gotten involved, politically or, as much as she feels like she should. And then she also was like, I've been organizing all these food trucks to come out to my neighborhood so that like kids can have popsicles at, on Fridays at 5 p.m. or whatever. And I was just so kind of like struck by that because it's like, you're actually doing really important work for your community, like that you're providing a respite and a break and a place for people to connect in a safe way. Like you're actually doing really important work. And I think that we have this tendency to think everybody should be doing the same thing. When in reality, like people are called to different things. I mean, scripture tells us this, but people are called to do different things in different ways. So I do think that this is beautifully important. But I also think like it makes me think of church and how people will say like, oh, well, the church isn't doing enough and the church should be doing more. And it's like, well, but the end game for church is that we know what God has done for us. And that we hear that over and over again. And whatever comes out of that is the fruit of the Spirit. But the point is not that the church should be doing more. And so it's just interesting to me to hear this like beauty for the sake of beauty. You know what I mean? In a time when so many things are just ugly. I really love this. And I did not expect to. When you sent us a sports article, I was like, really, Dave, again? But I like it.
It made me think about worship and church as play. And I definitely have that impulse, that I want. Clearly, church, there's an element of seriousness and reverence, and we're talking about things that really matter, that go to the core, we think, of who we are as people and who God is and the nature of the universe. But I have this impulse to never want it to be too serious, and that it makes me nervous sometimes. Like one year. At a contemporary service I was overseeing at Easter, I played a clip from MC Hammer's "You Can't Touch This," because I talked about after the resurrection, like Satan couldn't touch us, and I had to cut the YouTube video right before it was just like a big butt on the screen. I was like, I gotta make sure I don't go too far. But I have that impulse, and that's been one of the huge gifts of the last 6-7 months to me, is that the pandemic has allowed, I think, a little space for kind of play in worship, and to try different things, to try a drive-in worship service, to try, for our offertory in church, I've been finding YouTube videos, and sometimes they're very reverent, beautiful music from English cathedrals. And 2 weeks ago, I played this song from this 1970s kind of reggae pop group called the Pioneers, called "Let Your Yeah Be Yeah," and they're all wearing bell bottoms and leisure suits, and it made me nervous. Someone showed me something someone put on Instagram of their parents watching church on YouTube at home. And they said, my parents are watching church right now and wondering what is going on. Because on the screen, you could see these 3 Jamaican men in 1970s polyester leisure suits singing "Let Your Yeah Be Yeah." But people have received it really well, actually. And I think they've been open to that, to this balance of reverence and levity, right? Of kind of play and seriousness. And I think that's really important in worship, because I don't want to think about it like a game, but if we do think about it like a game, it's almost like we're playing a game that's already been won. And there's freedom in that, right? There's joy and hope that we can just sort of play the game of life. And that's ridiculous. And I just said that, but I mean it, right? Play the game of life. And there's going to be ups and downs and joys and sorrows and deaths and resurrections, but it's already been won. And so we don't have to take it so deathly seriously because someone has already died. Someone has already died and been risen again.
What reminded me of, so a couple weeks ago, I don't know if I forget if I mentioned it on here, but I had the privilege of seeing this movie Electric Jesus, which sort of some friends of Mockingbird have made. It's a great movie. It stars one of the people from The Office. A real motion picture, and it's very funny. And it's sort of a coming of age, but affectionate story of a failed Christian rock band in the 80s, which is a very fertile ground for humor, but also
crucifixorious.
For seriousness, though. This is a guy who's like, I grew up in that culture, and I've never seen it portrayed. Either people are superheroes or they're total hypocrites, and that just wasn't my experience of people in that. And so it's just, anyway, and it while it's very funny and winsome and the music is incredible, it also has got some real poignant moments, especially towards the end. But I was asking them about it, how it's been received so far as they've been showing it to people, and especially trying to get it into film festivals. And I said, well, you'll be surprised. We've yet to be turned down. Everyone is into this movie, partly because so much of the films being made are important, and they're tackling inequality and racism and, apocalyptic feelings. It's statement movies. And he said all of these film festivals are dying to have something that's kind of fun. It's still like comfort food, or just feel good is the wrong word, but is something that's more of a playground. And so he said that they've actually benefited from that. The other thing I thought about, what, Sarah?
Well, I would just say, I'm not trying to correct you, but I think in the way that we're talking about these things, sometimes we feel like we have to apologize actually for this stuff in the face of the more serious stuff. And I would actually say we don't like this stuff because it's playful. We like this stuff because it's not going to re-traumatize us.
Yeah.
Frankly. I mean,
and there's something of the ministry of Jesus in it, right? I think it came up in one of the readings, Jesus, why do your disciples not fast and wash their hands? And Jesus being like, you got to feast when the bridegroom is with you. There is a sense of like playfulness and living life. That's part of Jesus'
Well, that's
ministry.
like just as valid.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's just as valid. In fact, if you're really getting into the theological core of it, there's a Nigerian theologian, I think we've mentioned him one time before. His name's Nimi Boko. And he wrote a book called The Pentecostal Principle. And in it, this is what he says. He says, grace, by definition, is a genuine gift and not a secretly instrumentalized one. Freely it is given and freely it is received. It has no purpose, no self-addressed envelope from the giver to send something in return. It is a pure means of relations between the believer and God. It is play, not because it is trivial and worthless, but because it has no end. It's an unended action. So play is the essential character of spirituality governed by the grace principle rather than the work principle. Jesus said, unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And then later we interviewed this theologian for our Work and Play issue of the magazine a while back. And he said this, he said, when I became a Pentecostal in 1993, I worshiped in a Pentecostal church that was on Victoria Island, the lush upper-class area of Lagos in Nigeria. This part of Lagos was also adjacent to a very poor neighborhood, Morocco. So the church was a mixture of the upper echelon and the lowest rung of Nigeria. The poor were in majority. I experienced grace as an eruption of God among people who were perpetually vulnerable to death because of poverty and excess weight of suffering. Yet worship among the poor was a form of play, an explosion of joy, a pure means. Grace was an excess, surplus power beyond the obligations of the law and constricted possibilities of life in Morocco. Isn't that incredible?
I love that. So, I mean, the whole vision of it is so beautiful. And it really makes me think about like the people that I'm most comfortable around are the people that take themselves the least seriously. Like you know what I mean? Like the people I just want to be around. And it's because they call me out to take myself less seriously. And there's just so much gospel there for me. Like I can find rest there.
Yeah. Grace is play, sort of bring you back to,
I love it.
Hey, you're not, this isn't as serious as you think.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
What is that quote from, is it Chesterton? He says like the situation is grave but not serious, is it something like that?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I know people may hear this and think like, oh, well, they're not taking whatever cultural issue seriously. And it's like, no, those things are very serious. But if that is your only reality, if that is your starting point, gosh, you're just going to be exhausted. Like you can't, so this is speaking personally, if that becomes like and I have certainly had certain, seasons in my life where that has been the this is all serious and I have to be worried about it kind of mentality. The problem is I then can't get out of bed to take care of my children in the morning. So you either can take everything seriously and have completely screwed up kids, or you can be playful and be with them. I don't know.
I've absolutely found that, Sarah. Like the more seriously I take something and think about something, the less energy and inspiration I have to actually face it.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm like, okay, this is a thing.
Yes.
But it's not that important.
It's not the
I'm
thing.
not that important. And then suddenly you have some energy to face it and deal with it.
Well, that actually dovetails perfectly into our next series of articles. We've talked about this before. It was a major viral article a couple years ago, but it's become a book. Anne Helen Peterson, if you don't know that name, remember it. And actually, I could just without qualification recommend this book that she's written. It's called, the title is Can't Even, How Millennials Became the Burnout Generation. Now, the opening paragraph of the sort of blurb on the inside of the book is, do you feel like your life is an endless to-do list? Do you find yourself mindlessly scrolling through Instagram because you're too exhausted to pick up a book? Are you mired in debt, or feel as if you work all the time, or feel pressure to take whatever gives you joy and turn it into a monetizable hustle? Welcome to burnout culture. Welcome to burnout culture. Now, Peterson has been all over the webs this couple weeks, interviewed everywhere and reviewed. One of the places she was interviewed was The Atlantic by Joe Pinsker. And he asks her, what connections do you see between how millennials were raised and how burned out many of them are now as adults? This is what she writes. She says there are two major factors. The first is conceiving of children as mini adults, trying to cultivate behaviors, postures, and skills that are associated with adults, like being able to carry on conversations with adults or advocating for themselves when they feel something is unfair. I think we often admire that sort of precociousness without understanding what's lost when you cultivate that in a child. The other component is thinking of childhood as a means to an end. I mean, anti-play. And that end is getting into a good college. So instead of viewing childhood as simply childhood, parents are thinking, how can these various experiences, everything from playdates to piano lessons, lead to this larger resume-building path to college? When childhood is treated that way, it can eliminate space for the formation of personality, independence, or confidence. Anything not oriented toward that goal of college, things like hobbies, get lost. One of the saddest things I heard when talking to many millennials is that when they reach a point of exhaustion with work, lift their head up and look around them, they're like, what else is there? Do I have a personality? Do I know what I like? There's no there other than their ability to work, and I think that's really difficult. She goes on, he says, well, when I read the chapter in your book about millennials' own parenting, it seemed like many of them were doing the same things their own parents did, just more intensely. Peterson responds, yeah, whether it's more activities, more schedules, more supervision, more attention to the specifics of schooling, all of those things just keep going up. It does make sense that now, as millennials have reached adulthood and often have less stability than their parents, they're taking a lot of the same strategies their parents used and just ratcheting them up.
I don't know what to say. It's so terrifying.
Do you feel seen in it, though?
I do feel seen. I mean, my parents definitely were like, I remember saying to my parents at 9, like, I'm not an adult. And they're like, you're going to become one. Like, there was definitely like that drive. I feel, I'm an elder millennial. I don't remember I have friends who experience that kind of like drive and focus towards college. And while college was definitely something I was going to do, it wasn't. I know people now who, it's the violin lessons and the piano lessons and the athletics and all that stuff, which leads to the right, elementary school, middle school, high school, college kind of pattern. I minister to some of those kids at college, right? Like that is the reality a lot of young people have been through. And that's hard. I remember being around a father of a friend of one of our son's friend's parents, and the kids were like 5, and he was talking about his daughter, and he said, she says she doesn't want to play soccer anymore, so we're just like, you need to pick what your thing is. And I was like, whoa, like I think that was the first time I'd really like seen it like that clearly, I do want to say, just as a word of grace, I know that we all feel like our kids need to be back in athletics, and maybe it's because my son broke his arm twice in 1 year also, but we are just using the pandemic as an excuse to not do anything beyond school this year, and it has been amazing. I highly recommend it. We also like were blessed with this season when Hurricane Harvey hit. We did the same thing. We were like, you know what? We're just going to take the year off.
We're checking out.
It's our Jubilee year, basically.
But what's his thing going to be? What's his thing going to be, Sarah?
What's his thing going to be? I don't know. Right now it's Pokemon. He's super into that.
That's his thing.
We have rules in our house where every third dinner conversation can have nothing to do with Pokemon, because otherwise that's all we talk about.
It's gonna be.
So, yeah, I don't know. It is wild. RJ, you guys are such chill parents. Like, I keep thinking about you, and
no,
like,
we're not.
You're
no,
so
we're
chill.
not. Oh my gosh, we might be a little more chill now, having gone through the whole college rigmarole with one kid and just realizing what. I don't know how to characterize it. What a hollow thing it is. What a shell game it is. But the article reminded me of a conversation that, for whatever reason, still sticks in my mind. It was probably 20 years ago. It was like Jamie and I were just married. We didn't have kids. We were at somebody's wedding reception, and it must have been an election year or something, because we were talking about the country and the gap between rich and poor, and all this sort of stuff. And I just remember the guy I was talking to, who's about my age, was just very matter of fact, being like, yeah, that's the way it is. Like, you're either going to do really well or you're going to have a really hard time. And I'm just going to do everything I can to make sure that me and my children are on the right side of that divide. And he didn't say it in like a bitter way. Just, I like this guy in a very matter of fact way. He's very thoughtful. But that there is that feeling, right? You're either going to do really well and be successful. You're going to have to work really hard, or you're not. And it feels like there's no in between. Now, I don't feel quite that same level of anxiety, but we do live in a world where it seems hard to get along if you don't either have one parent who's fantastically financially successful, or two parents who are both working very hard.
I just don't buy that. I think there's a
Really?
very solid in between, and it
Do
is
you and Josh both
called-
have full-time jobs?
It is called Ole Miss, honey, and they
Oh,
take
yeah.
everybody, and it is affordable. Y'all all need to be thinking about sending your babies to Ole Miss.
Yeah, you're probably
I
right.
mean, I just think that's so stupid. Sorry, but it's like they're perfectly wonderful, affordable. And I know Texas is not as easy to get in, but you want to look in the southeastern United States more closely. Easy to get into schools. I just don't buy it.
No, I agree with you. I don't completely buy it either, but it feels like that.
Sure,
and I
of
think that's
course.
what
Yeah,
what this
of course
author
it
is writing into. And am I wrong in saying in one of the articles we read, does she have children?
No, in fact, burnout.
She decided not to have children because of the anxiety wrapped up in
Yes.
sort of the idea of having children, right? Which I found to be
gosh.
so sad.
Sad.
I mean, with regard to just kids and letting them off the hook a little bit, Jamie has always said with our oldest son, you can tell he's doing well because he'll start playing guitar. He'll take out his guitar and just start playing it. But there were months and months on end during his junior and senior year when he never played his guitar because he was so wrapped up in it. And with Spencer, we can't wait for sports to start because, as I've said before, he has really not made any friends at school yet because we moved and everything's online or socially distanced. So getting into soccer, we're like, please let there be a soccer season so he can meet some people and make some friends. But he has spent, whenever I look over it, when he's on his computer and I look over his shoulder, he's composing music, right? He's in Logic or something like that, and he won't let me listen to any of it. He lets my youngest brother listen because my youngest brother lives in Brooklyn and is cool, which drives me nuts. But that does give me some joy that he's making music, and my little one is catching crabs and lizards and killing them. So there has been some gift in play.
Yeah, it's I just feel like I was raised very much in the kind of performancist East Coast private school thing.
Y'all are both
Yes.
so East
And
Coast,
full,
yeah.
it just produces a lot of really, really unhappy people. But it also produces a lot of high achieving, interesting folks, I guess too. It's not like there's a formula here, but I do recognize that when she talks about burnout, I know that she's trying to talk about it in terms of millennials. I just recognize it. I just see it everywhere. I feel everyone is kind of burnt out, and the pandemic has highlighted that for some people. It's also allowed us to realize to sort of scale back, as you mentioned, Sarah. I mean, I haven't traveled at all this last 6 months, and there's been a lot of real benefits to that. I miss it though, and if given the opportunity, would I go back out there? Or probably. But so she doesn't just talk about parenting. Thankfully, she casts a very wide net. And there was a portion of the book that was published in Wired, and is about work. And she describes work sort of in the digital age in a very, vivid way. Very funny too. She says, as work becomes more remote, it's something so many of us think about. How do we demonstrate that we're, quote, in the office when we're in our sweatpants on the couch? I do it by dropping links to articles, to commenting on other people's, to participating in conversations to show that I'm engaged. I work very hard, in other words, to produce evidence that I'm constantly doing work instead of, actually doing work. We're performing, in other words, largely for ourselves, performing work, justifying to ourselves that we deserve our job. And that's the reality of the internet-ridden life. I need to be an insanely productive writer and be funny on Slack and post good links on Twitter and keep the house clean and cook a fun new recipe from Pinterest and track my exercise on Map My Run and text my friends to ask questions about their growing children and check in with my mom and grow tomatoes in the backyard and enjoy Montana and Instagram myself enjoying Montana and shower and put on cute clothes for that 30-minute video call with my coworkers and. Oh, that's a great paragraph. Then she says, but the internet isn't the root cause of our burnout. Its promise to make our lives easier is a profoundly broken one, responsible for the illusion that, quote, doing it all isn't just possible but mandatory. When we fail to do so, we don't blame the broken tools. We blame ourselves. Deep down, we know the primary exacerbator of burnout isn't really email or Instagram or a constant stream of news alerts. It's the continuous failure to reach the impossible expectations we've set for ourselves. Oh, I mean, that is a description of what when we say the law is a curse, or it can be experienced that way. That's, I think, a very apt description of what it feels like. This treadmill, and maybe your ands are different than hers, but they're there. And it's that burnout. I mean, for me, this is where the Christian faith has such a enormous natural entree point, and almost like you have to hide it to not be to intentionally turn Christianity into something that's another and, rather than say it's where you go when the ands have crushed you. And so I think that the continuous failure to reach the impossible expectations we've set for ourselves, which social media, as we know, makes you feel like you're the only one not meeting. And this is, again, we could see it as nothing but negativity. But if it's true that everyone feels crushed by the law of not enough, then it's also true that, that's a unifying thing in a world where there's very little unity. That's an actually unifying experience among cross-demographics, but it's also a place where we can talk about grace. We talk about Jesus. We can talk about God. We can talk about salvation. We can talk about freedom. We could talk about the Chinese credit system, that we talked about. Anyway, that's me sort of preaching, but I thought it was a very effective description. And this book, again, I can't recommend it more entirely.
I was out this morning. I was taking the kids to school, and I came back in my car, and where there's always like women, especially out walking and running, and there are these two women who are like somewhere around my age, and they're just like really thin and pretty, and just so pretty, and they were running, and which is not a thing I can really do anymore, and or really have ever wanted to do. Let's be honest, but they were running. And they, somewhere around my age, and there was this group of women who were probably in their 60s who were all walking together, and it was a much bigger group. Like there were two pretty women, and then there was like this probably like 8 to 10 women in their 60s walking, and the women in their 60s look so chill. Like they were like enjoying each other, and like, and it was like, didn't really, like, it didn't look like super athletic walking, you know what I mean? Like this is like time to just hang out. And I was like, I want
to go to there.
I know. Yes. Like I was like, how do I get there before I'm there? That's what what I need. Yeah. That's what I want, because it's just like this weird, endless, like I am as a woman. I mean, and I'm sure men feel this to a certain extent too, but I'm like, at what point do I stop seeing photographs of like super sculpted moms on Instagram, and somehow part of my brain is like, I could do that. Like at what point will that stop happening to me? Like I'm ready for that to stop, like I don't know.
There was some article recently that the headline was basically something like, studies show that true happiness begins at age 47 or something. Like everything changes at 47. I'm like, please, that's only 3 years away. Is that true? I really hope that's true.
Just another decade.
But Dave, I've been thinking about this a lot personally lately. Just why am I so hard on myself? Like, why do I seem to be harder on myself than anyone else is? And why do I have to do everything? And why do I have to do it well? And is it about Jesus? Is it about other people? Is it about God? Or is it just about me?
Yeah.
Is it just about other people, me needing to know that other people know that I'm working hard or trying hard or doing my best? Or, yes, there's been definitely some playfulness with regard to church, but there's also this sense of like, okay, let's just do as much as we possibly can so that when this is over, no one could ever say we didn't try hard.
Totally.
Totally. Yeah. And who knows how many people show up or what ministry will get done or how God will bless it, but at least people will know he did not take those 6 months off.
Yeah.
Right.
And some of that is wrapped up in like, being in a new job and trying to prove myself. But I'm pretty sure most pastors out there feel, especially if you're listening to this podcast, like you feel that way too, right?
Yeah.
You just like, if someone if someone comes up to you and says, "Oh, that must have been a really nice vacation for the past 6 months," it's like you might not kill them, but you'll want to.
Well,
You'll
Peterson has spoken with a lot of clergy about this very same thing.
Really?
But it's interesting when you're talking. My mother was saying that she's already sensing the new law is definitely, it's already coming out. It's like, it's that question of, what did you do with your COVID? Like, what did you do?
Yeah.
Like, how did you
right.
not just maximize it? What did you do? Did you just sit on the couch? Did you just binge TV, or did you just kind of muddle through, or did you lose weight? Did you write a book? Did you whatever it is? How did your church, like,
How did you maximize?
How did you maximize?
I think
email
the
like
best
that
answer to
yesterday.
that is like, I didn't get divorced. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's what I did.
I only went on minimal antidepressants.
Right, exactly.
No, I got an email like that yesterday from one of these like church consulting firms, and they're like, so and so church in such and such place, they completely redid their sanctuary during the pandemic. They made good use of this time. I'm like, well, God bless them that they had a couple extra $1 million lying around to do that. Most churches were just trying to pay the bills.
Well, before we
grief.
get into the church angle, which is very important here, I do want to say that, Sarah, some of the things you're mentioning, my father's new book about peace in the last third of life, he really breaks up the life into the first third, the second third, and the last third. And we're all, the three of us, are very much in the second third, which he said is full of proving. It's full of activity that feels extremely important at the time, but you look back on when you're older, and what it kind of is a blur, partly because you were tired and maybe you're proud of some things, but what you're really thinking about is the first third of life and the play you got to do as a kid, or the hurts that the heartbreaks, or the love that you experienced during that time. And he said his consistent experiences that people in the last third of life are really trying to reconcile the first third of life and almost ignoring the second third. Now, that may be an easy thing to say, but I just want to. What I think the goal of life is maybe to get to a third of life, the last third of life state of mind before you actually have to get there logistically, because that's the time when you're thinking about God, about relationships.
No, but it's so true. And the gospel is I will say it. I think the gospel is actually the only way you could get there.
Yeah.
Like, that's just like, I don't know what other. I do all the cognitive behavioral therapy, all the meditation, I do all that stuff, but none of that stuff helps me to rest the way that knowing that death does not have the final word, that my value is not in, my hot mom bod that's never going to happen. Like that, I find more relief there than I do any place else.
Well, let's talk about how this actually affects clergy, because this is Peterson, to her great credit, although she doesn't really consider herself a Christian, she clearly she was brought up in I think a Presbyterian context and has a lot of affection for it, which is kind of code word just in my mind for sort of saying she's kind of hanging on to it, but waiting to revisit it in the third of life, because it's just not fashionable right now. Yeah. But this is what she wrote, a newsletter actually related to the book, talking about clergy burnout, which is something we've danced around quite a bit. This is her intro, and then I'll read one of the people she interviews. When people feel like they need to be working all the time and don't have time for rest, let alone a whole Sabbath or the wherewithal for a weekly commitment, religious attendance goes down. And the ramifications of dwindling congregations and maintaining existing members while recruiting new ones falls on the clergy. Being a religious leader has never been easy, or for most, lucrative. But when the secular world is exhausting and precarious as it is now, the religious leader, tasked with tending to the spiritual needs of their congregation, is going to absorb it to the point of overflowing. That's enough of a psychological burden to bear. Now imagine doing it while not having health insurance and working a second job and worrying about defaulting on your loans. And now imagine everything that a clergy member was tasked with doing, and doing it during a pandemic. A recent survey by the National Association of Evangelicals found that 59% of pastors have no family health insurance. 62% have no retirement fund or plan. Half of the pastors surveyed had a salary and housing package that added up to under $50,000. In 2018, the average total student loan debt for a seminary graduate was $54,600. A survey of Wisconsin clergy, administered in July of 2020, found 10% of all clergy's employment had been threatened as a result of COVID-related ministry decisions, and 25% of clergy had seriously considered retiring or resigning due to the stresses of performing their job during COVID. Now, to get a little closer to our context, Peterson solicited a response from Marcella, who is an Episcopal priest in Connecticut, age 36. Sarah, I hope you feel seen.
I do.
This is what she says. She writes, I'm an assistant rector for youth and family ministries, so I run youth groups, faith formation classes, service trips, intergenerational ministries, outreach projects, chaplain at our preschool, plus all the regular stuff like preaching, leading worship, pastoral care, social justice, etc. The most gratifying part is getting to be a meaningful part of people's lives and getting to be in a community with others in a way that is so deep and powerful and life-giving. The most exhausting is that it's such intense emotional labor. Managing boundaries, navigating power dynamics, dealing with all the complicated behavior people bring into the community space, and wearing a million different hats. On any given day, I'm a spiritual leader, therapist, fundraiser, social worker, babysitter, budget specialist, community organizer, communications manager, curriculum designer, teacher, nonprofit administrator. Switching between those different roles wears me out. Then she says, many religious leaders are working 21st century jobs with 20th century skills. We're still getting trained and formed for a version of church life that doesn't exist anymore.
Turns out you're not going to be the rabbi in a Woody Allen movie, folks.
I only know the smallest handful of clergy who I would consider healthy, emotionally, spiritually, physically. The idea that following a, quote, calling carries with it this implication of God called you into this life. So you wear yourself out with that narrative, like you don't have agency and can't advocate for yourself in ecclesial systems the way you might be able to in a corporate system. The savior complex is rampant in this field, and there's almost no counter-narrative to that way of doing this work. Well, I bet that rang some bells for the two of you.
Whew. I'm like, I'm ready to name names. You know what I mean? I mean, there's so much to talk about. I do think, honestly, though, I think the where you ended, is the real problem in this. I think that we are trained for a very different kind of job. I mean, I've probably said this on here before, but like, I think it's like 1/3 of my class at Yale, my Episcopal class at Yale, is actually in like church ministry. A lot of people aren't even in ministry at all. I know someone who teaches aerobics now, with a degree from Yale Divinity School, because we aren't trained for this. And I have two ways of thinking about it. One is they absolutely need to change the training. It absolutely needs to be different. They need to change the process by which you even get into this training, because a lot of people shouldn't be there who are, and a lot of people aren't there who should be. But the other thing is, this is like an impossible expectation. I mean, you're asking someone to be essentially a really high-functioning psychologist, right? Mm-hmm. On some level, which none of us have that training and shouldn't have that training, because that's actually another field and you get paid more money to do that work. Mm-hmm. But the savior complex stuff is some bullshit. I mean, I don't know how else to say that.
It's so
I mean, like,
prevalent.
But I will say it's so prevalent and it's so pushed by like mainline Protestantism, because it feeds right into this idea. I mean, and everything that young woman listed off, she also was like, and social justice. And I'm like, girl, you just listed off 12 jobs. You know what I mean? Like, you got to pick one. Like, they're asking you to do too much. But I mean, I remember being around an older priest when I was like very young and impressionable in New York, and just hearing this like story about like there was like there was like stories about like never got a raise in the 10 years he was there, and then like there was like a parishioner who was on heroin and then needed to go on methadone, but asked the priest if they'd keep methadone in their fridge at their house for him. And he was like, oh yeah, no problem. With kids home. And like, that's bad. Like, that's not a good precedent. That's not a great way to look at ministry. There are like, and I don't like the word boundaries. There are less than no boundaries there, right? Like,
There's
That's
whatever the
terrifying to me.
anti-boundary is. That's what it is.
Yeah, I mean, just even
Black
the
hole.
money issue is so like terrifying. I mean, and we've been in those situations financially where, in previous places we've served, where like my parents were sending food to us in the mail. Like seriously, it's scary to me what some church institutions expect of their clergy, and then how little is given in return. Like, it's absolutely terrifying. Which is why we're never leaving where we are.
I was speaking with a bunch of clergy recently, which was really actually helpful. Some people I know well, and we were talking about ministry and what it's been like during the pandemic. And one of them said something that was really helpful, which was, that hopefully by supporting one another, we can let go of this fantasy that once we have all the right systems in place, suddenly ministry is just going to get a whole lot easier.
Yeah.
That was a really helpful thing to say, because I think on top of all the pressures and demands that come with being a member of the clergy, the holding on to this idea that like someday things are going to be easier or better, or that someday you're not going to have massive interruptions, or things are just going to seem that's really not necessarily going to happen, and that's okay, right? That ministry is messy because life is messy. Letting go of this idea that someday everything is just going to be easy. It's helpful to let go of that, and then maybe just to live daily or weekly or whatever, and just try to think, okay, what needs to get done today, and what can be left until tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, I think that Peterson, though, is basically saying that it turns out, although it feels like clergy life is completely singular and its own set of issues, the whole book is basically about how a lot of people in other, the hustle, the gig economy,
Yeah.
anyone who's working online feels this kind of burnout pressure. I mean, you're right. And I think that the different hats that clergy are asked to wear from where I'm sitting is not really, I only play one on TV, but it's, the different hats can be super confusing, exhausting, and certainly if there was a set of expectations that you received either from your childhood or from your seminary that you are resenting because it hasn't measured up to that at all, the reality, then you're...
Or even from your church,
yeah.
right? Like when you take these jobs and they're like, we want an excellent preacher and someone who's really good at pastoral care, and also a CEO would be preferable. If you have some nonprofit experience, that would be excellent. A financial advisor, a marriage counselor. Like, and then you get in there and they're like, do you know how to fix roofs?
Yeah.
It's like, it's just...
What do you know about fundraising events in the digital age? What?
Right.
I don't know
Like,
anything
you're like,
about that.
I don't know anything. Yeah, I don't know anything.
Well, it's a very serious, and I think what she is saying in there is that a lot of the answer in her book is that people need to help each other. And that there is some sort of solidarity, some kind of support group aspect, and what she does, I think, in collecting a bunch of different responses, it's not all. There's evangelical clergy, there's rabbis, there's Catholics. I mean, it's in that little thing. I in her newsletter, she's basically saying that I think everyone probably felt very seen by even being asked this question. But when she reached out to millennials more generally about burnout, she said she was surprised by the barely contained rage, especially on behalf of young mothers, and secondly, the amount of essays she received in response, because people have a lot of thoughts about this. This is where they're actually living, and I think that it's instructive for those of us who are trying to actually reach these people. I think where I would enter into it, and where we're about to enter into it, is when we talk about a low anthropology, we're not talking about something academic. We're talking about the expectations and potentials and possibilities that we believe of human beings. What do you think human beings are like? And if you have an inflated anthropology, which burnout culture is essentially a mammoth manifestation of high anthropology. When you read, again, we talked about social dilemma, then the social media and the people in Silicon Valley who designed a lot of Slack, which basically ensures you'll never stop working. There was a lot of great intention behind this, but there was always this lurking sense that people that efficiency is the most important thing in life, and that people were could handle this. And a low anthropology says that actually there are limitations on what is possible and what is good. And that, in fact, there are some places where we need help, where we do need other people, and that to construct, to actually, for the sake of charity, for the sake of creativity, for the sake of service, we need to lower lower the bar, as it were. And if you're constantly being fed a sort of exceptionalism, you're special, you can do this, you're already halfway there, it's going to be much, much harder. It's going to set you up for enormous amounts of bitterness, resentment, exhaustion, confusion. And in fact, that's where we kind of get to in this final article, which was fantastic. And I know we're probably going to be in the realm of...
Dave, can I jump in? I have to jump in.
Okay, yeah.
I know you want to keep talking, but I have to jump in. Because I know people are going to hear this who are lay people. We're not like the preaching podcast. That's the other one. And I know lay people are going to hear this and think like, how can I help my clergy person? Like, what does this look like? And I really think we've served at 2 churches that have felt like places that truly loved us. And that is the place we are right now. And that is a very tiny church in Eastchester, New York, called St. Luke's. And I think both of those places were full of people that believed that it was a community effort and believed that it wasn't just the priest that is carrying everything, but that showed up regularly in our lives to say, how can we help you? How can we love you better? And also, how can we love this community better? How can we love it in a different way? So I say that because the church right now is pretty big. That church was like 25 people on a Sunday, but both of those places were just full of people that, they knew that community was going to be there. They knew it had been there before we got there. They knew it would be there after we left, and they wanted to welcome us into their story. So I just wanted to say that, like, genuine love and like showing up with fruit baskets when a pet dies go a long way for clergy.
But there is something theological about that. If you think that your clergy are basically separate from other Christians, that they're sort of imbued with superpowers, and that the church's idea, the church exists solely for outreach, and you were to be these robots, and like you kind of hold yourself above.
Like, what is the church going to do?
Above the rest of the world, then you're not going to have much love.
You just missed the best parts. You missed the best parts. Anyway, sorry, Dave. I just had
No, that's great. Because I don't want it to sound like a griping session. I just know that when we're talking about a lot of suicidal ideation among pastors and a lot of people, like I think the numbers actually are much higher than that. I was talking to a person the other day who said that 8 out of 10 people in the ministry surveyed had considered stopping working in ministry over the last 6 months. And that's not because they got too much free time, my friends. That's...
No,
it's also
Yeah.
Well, I'll say a couple things. It's also because if you're in this work, it's probably because you like people. You like being around people, and it's been difficult not to be around people.
Yeah.
And to your point, Sarah, too, I will say, like, and this has caused me to consider why am I so hard on myself, but one of the great gifts of where I am, which is a wonderful church, has been the encouraging words.
Yes.
Has been the, you've done so much, you're working so hard. You've tried so many different things. Like, thank you. We're so glad you're here. We're so thankful for you. Like, that is just like oxygen.
Yeah.
Words of encouragement go such.
Yeah, it's oxygen for people who are in other situations too.
And that's right. Any kind of.
It's just called love.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Blah blah blah.
Yeah. Give them a raise, by the way. That's the other thing I say. Always be thinking about.
And then the
always
clergy
be
person
thinking.
has to take it is the other thing, because I'm constantly hearing about clergy people who aren't taking raises, and I'm like, okay,
exactly. Ugh.
That sounds so fun for your wife.
Well, this is a great, I think, ending note, which is from The Guardian. I was not expecting this article, though it's similar to something we read a few weeks ago. And the title is "Think Unconscious Bias Training is a Fad? It's been going on for at least 2,000 years." This is by Peter Ormerod. He talks about how some folks are finding this unconscious bias training in England or in various corporate settings to be this sort of incursion of leftist, PC gone wild. And this is what he says, is there's nothing new about it, because one institution has been offering its own kind of training in unconscious bias for roughly 2,000 years, the Christian church. The conventional Christian understanding of sin seems to me entirely consistent with ideas about racism that appear to some as modern. Christianity asserts that sin is embedded deep in the human condition. Racism is one of its vilest manifestation. There's every reason to expect it to work in us as sin does generally. Christianity understands that sin isn't all about the bad things we consciously do. As various liturgies put it, we sin not just through our own deliberate fault, but also through negligence, through weakness. We have, quote, left undone those things which we ought to have done. One can sin by omission. Which takes us to the idea that people can be unaware or ignorant of their own failings. It's about as orthodox as it gets. According to the Gospels, Jesus spent much of his ministry decrying self-righteousness, attacking those who believed themselves to be untouched by sin. He deployed an array of striking images in his condemnation. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye, he asks. Elsewhere, he calls some of the moral arbiters of the day whitewashed tombs. Further, we are often driven by forces and desires we fail to grasp or fully apprehend. St. Paul was honest about this. I do not understand my own actions, he wrote, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. He went on, I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do. More of us could do with that self-awareness. We can say we hate racism, we can campaign against it, we can damn others as racist, but that doesn't make us immune to it. Yet there is another story. When Orthodox Christian concepts of sin, justice, and hope come together, we see change. It is surely no surprise that arguably the two most significant anti-racism movements of the 20th century had as key figures men of the church, Martin Luther King and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. There are those who say the church should talk about sin less. I say it should talk about it more.
Amen.
The bleak stuff is a part of it because it is a part of us. But allied to it are remarkable, life-giving ideas the world needs more of: repentance, atonement, forgiveness, redemption, salvation. And most radical of all is the conviction that, in spite of all our failings, each of us has equal, infinite, and inherent worth, and each of us is loved.
Good stuff.
That's the full Monty right there, I think. That's
It is, yeah, it's so good.
I know it's repeating. I don't want to be too self-conscious about this, but I'm on the verge of trying to begin a big new writing project about this very subject and how what the world hears sometimes as defeating news about sin or apathetic understandings of human condition, the low anthropology, is actually the doorway to hope and compassion and love and freedom and all of the things that we say we actually want. It's not the constant harangue of do more, try harder, be the best version of yourself. It's actually come to grips with who you really are, in the hopes that you might therefore at that point be of use to someone else. So, but what do you guys think?
It made me think. One thing I did recently is I finished watching The Good Place. Have you guys watched all of The Good Place? You know, which is
I haven't finished it.
it's pretty amazing. You know, it's the Ted Danson. Oh gosh, what's the female main character's name?
Kristen Bell?
Kristen Bell. Thank you.
Eleanor Showstrop?
Yeah, sitcom that's basically about heaven and the nature of existence and morality and some ways, profoundly hopeful, and in some ways not so much, but it does deal with this problem of sin. But one thing that I was just struck by was the possibility of forgiveness never entered the picture. Not really. No, it was all about our ability to improve, to work on ourselves, to make right ethical choices, and given that this,
I don't think Sarah's going to finish it now.
No, but it is
either.
worth watching. It's very interesting. I think it.
RJ, I do not watch things that are worth
No,
watching.
but it's also
okay?
funny and entertaining and good.
Is there a drag queen in it? Then
Yeah. See, these are
Is
my
there?
requirements.
There kind of is. But what was I going to say? And then also in talking about
Sorry,
work
RJ.
and play, at the end of the day, what this show kind of says is that the object of life is kind of work and self-improvement. And then when work comes to an end, there's almost no reason to exist anymore. Dave, is that fair to say about the end of that show?
I think it's slightly what they called it. I've heard it characterized as a soft nihilism.
Yes. Yes.
And,
Maybe
with a tremendous
overstating
humor
it,
and
overstating the
warmth.
case.
I feel like I'm not breathing.
But I kept on waiting for I just want to be like, but forgiveness. But yes, you've sort of nailed the human condition. But the whole idea of, as this article says, truth telling, yes, but confession, repentance, forgiveness, right? Maybe the only solution at the end of the day is just having your record expunged, and not holding on to this fantasy that through multiple billions of years, I'm finally going to improve to the point where I'm fundamentally different than I am now. So, anyway, I found this, it was very hopeful to see this article in The Guardian and to talk about, as we walk through this difficult moment around this social upheaval, it's a profoundly Christian thing to acknowledge that sin is something you don't have control over, and that's part of who you are, and to just come clean about it in light of the forgiveness that we are offered in Jesus. So amazing to see this in The Guardian.
Yeah, I just think there's so much relief here. I mean, that's always like the message of this message for me, is like that I can find some rest in acknowledging that I'm a sinner and acknowledging that I need forgiveness. It is interesting to me, though, like how much of an aggressive pushback there is, especially, I'll be honest, in these major mainline denominations that are wanting to talk about racism, right? They're wanting to fix racism, but they're not really wanting to talk about personal sin. They'll talk about like corporate sin, they'll talk about community sin, especially if it's not their community, but like talking about like the personal sin of racism,
The person,
and maybe they will talk about it, but they won't land on forgiveness. Do you know what I mean? Like that actually is not a part of the deal. Like you just get to feel like a really guilty white person. Oh, there's nothing else.
Oh yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's like it. And oh, by the way, like that actually won't make you useful in solving the problem of racism, but that's okay, right? Because like you get to feel like all your personal guilt and sin. I don't know. It's just interesting to me. There's no then like movement.
It's a classic left-right thing where the right loves to talk about personal sin, but really has a hard time with collective sin, and the left wants to talk about collective sin, but really has a hard time talking about personal sin. And it's like, why can't we say both? I mean, collectives are made up of persons,
but neither one wants to talk about uncontrollable sin. Neither one wants to talk
100%.
about sin as being something that you don't have a
100%.
choice about or that you can't act
Yes.
your way out of. Like that's what binds
Yes.
it all together. Is right. Like don't tell me I can't get my act together. Right. Like
Yeah.
Right.
and that you're still somehow culpable for. That's the conundrum, because basically if we're only forgiven for the things that we're conscious of, then we're kind of screwed. The great radical message of forgiveness is that you're not only forgiven for the stuff that you consciously do, but the things that that are out of your control, the stuff that you wish you didn't do but still do.
known and unknown, done and left undone.
Yeah, and this is very uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for me. I mean, I don't want to talk about that sort of stuff, especially like when you want to be honest enough to say that you enjoy a lot of the wrongdoing, that you and that you benefit from the systems, but you also I was watching my little son yesterday. He had one of those days where he like stole an eraser from a girl in his class and then lied to us about drinking a Diet Coke. And
Hell
you were just like, gosh, this is a crash course. And he was enjoying these things, like deeply enjoying them. And yet afterwards, we're like, son, you can't. Those are just in case you're wondering. You may have felt overpowered by the urge to do that in both those cases, but you still need to apologize and figure it out, and not be completely, because his response was like, I'm the worst person in the world, or I just fall apart instead of like. I sort of wish he would say, I didn't do that. I was like, stop lying. But
in our house, we just say, ooh, your brain's giving you bad ideas.
I was like, here, I did the Dorothy Martin thing. It's like you might. I think you need some help making good decisions today.
Oh, that's so much better than what I say.
And don't go anywhere near that caffeine, or else Daddy's not going to be able to watch his show.
I mean, it does make me think of like what RJ was saying earlier about like being hard on himself. But I mean, I kind of love everything in this episode because I think there's something about play and even like humor about ourselves that gives us access to mercy and forgiveness and the knowledge that like we're gonna fail at things and like we actually can rest in that truth, you know? Like I think there's something really beautiful about like I've started talking to my dog a lot more.
Cut that.
She's the only one that's home. And I'll do something dumb and I'll be like, wow, that was kind of silly, like to the dog. And I don't know, there's something really beautiful about that.
That's I was deeply encouraged this week because Mockingbird has a new devotional coming out, and it's been 2 years in the making. RJ's in there, Sarah's in there, I've contributed a lot, but there's like 70 people that have contributed this thing. And so I sent emails out to about 15 people who I knew could get back to me fairly quickly, asking, will you put together a little video just saying that people should buy the devotional and like just hype it and just it's fun. It's just see what happens. Every single person sent back something hilarious. I was like, or something clever, or something. I was like, the play. I didn't tell them to, and every single reaction was one that was sillier than the next. And I was forwarding these to our video guy, and he's like, these are amazing. Did you tell people to be wacky? I said, no, because if you tell people to be wacky, they'll be like, oh no, I got to be wacky. That's the least wacky thing in the world. But I thought, gosh, maybe it is worth buying our devotional if this is the fruit that this message is producing with these people.
It's freedom in the gospel. I'm serious, y'all. Freedom in the gospel and play in the gospel is the most serious thing in the world. It really is. It ruffles feathers in ways you would not expect. It gives you oxygen. I mean, it's just like it's my drug of choice.
Yeah, wait till you see the one Sarah submitted.
I mean, get ready.
It's that, by the way, this is as good a place to close as any, but that announcement should be up any second. And so stay tuned to the not yours, but the pre-orders for this devotional.
Okay. I got to brace myself for that.
It's funny. Guys, thank you both for playing, because I feel like this podcast is always at its best when we're feeling playful, which means when RJ's had enough sleep. So,
that is what it depends upon. So,
all right, well, go forth,
Talk
play.
To you soon.
Have a good week.
You too. Bye, friends.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by TJ Hester. And if you like what you've heard, please do drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. Until next time.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.